Hi, welcome to a Qrvey tutorial video. My name is Natan Cohen. I'm the head of customer success here at Qrvey. And in this video, we're going to be covering customization of your widget UI using CSS. So this is applicable to any widget that you can embed in Qrvey. For this video, we're going to be focusing on the dashboard widget since that is the most commonly embedded widget. I should mention that customizing widget styles does not include chart styles. So if you're looking to customize fonts and colors for your chart axes, data labels, if you want to change the color of bars or pie wedges and control the sequences there, anything chart related, you should use a theme for that. And we have a tutorial video for customizing themes as well. Also, we know CSS can be used to toggle the visibility of certain UI UX components. So if what you're really after is hiding certain controls and buttons from certain types of users, you should check out the tutorial video for feature customizations. So with that, let's get started. So we're going to get started by going to the partner portal. And I have the customized widgets using CSS document already loaded. And this is the main reference library that you'll want to bookmark so that you can come back to it as a reference when you're customizing styles for your widgets. Now, the convention that you'll be using here is CSS variables, special variables that Qrvey has provided for you to use. And before we get into what the naming convention for these CSS variables is and the different options that you have for styling, we should talk about why it is that we're using CSS variables. So I think the best way to do that is really to load the CodePen example here, really just to look at the code itself, because I think this makes the point quite well. As you may know, when you're embedding a Qrvey widget, the only HTML markup that you see for our widget is a custom HTML tag. In this case, this element is Qrvey-builders. And if you've embedded several different types of Qrvey widgets, you know that the HTML element that we use is always different for each widget. Now, why do I mention this? Because this is the only tag that you see. When the widget is rendered and the full UI UX appears, there are many additional HTML elements. There are many additional CSS classes, some JavaScript as well. As you may know, we don't use iframes. We use the web component standard. All of the markup is contained within a shadow DOM. But what's important is that you can't see any of that until it's rendered, and you could then do an inspect element and take a look at all the elements that we're rendering. But all of those elements, Qrvey controls. Where the classes are applied, Qrvey also controls. So if we didn't use CSS variables, trying to define and customize these classes would be a very difficult experience, and we would lose the ability to change the markup in any way because that would interfere with the classes that you set. So the best way to do custom classes for components is to use CSS variables, and that's what we've done. So now that you know why we're using CSS variables, let's take a look at Qrvey's naming convention for those variables. All CSS variables begin with 2 dashes. Qrvey CSS variables always begin with the letters Q and V, followed by a dash. Then what comes first would be the module that the variable applies to. You can think of a module as an area of functionality. It might be a chart, it could be a dashboard, it might even be global, for example. And then another dash followed by the property. So the property is what you're going to change, right? Are you going to change the color? Are you going to change the font or maybe the border, right? So that's what the property is. And then the attribute would be further context for that property. So the color of what, right? The color of text or the color of a title, for example. the font size for a title or the font size for a tooltip, right? And I should mention that not all CSS variables have all three of those components in the variable name, but they at least will always have a property as well as an attribute. And sometimes the module is global, and that just means it affects everything. So with that, let's take a look at some of the variables that we are giving you. Okay, so if we scroll down a bit, first we have the colors. And again, now you know how to read this. So this would be, the main component or the main module, and then we're changing the color. And just about all of these variables have a nice example so that you can see exactly what it's going to look like. We also have a way to control fonts. In this case, you'd be controlling the font for all of the components in the widget. We have properties for the positioning of certain components. The toast pop-up would be anytime you see an error or a notification pop up, typically in the top right. So, we have ways to control where those pop up. We have variables for borders as well. Like I said, all of these have examples so you can see how it's going to apply, right? Paddings, dashboards, etc. So let's see an example of how we start to apply our custom styles directly in our markup. So here we are in Visual Studio Code, and this is just a sample front end that embeds a dashboard widget. So what I'm going to do is apply my first style here that will change all of the fonts used in the dashboard widget to cursive. Now, here I have a widget container called widget-container. And within that div, it's going to generate the custom HTML element that will then be replaced by all of the markup once the widget is rendered. That custom HTML element for a dashboard is Qrvey dashboard. So this is where I'm creating it. So I'm going to go ahead and define the first style here. Okay. And notice that I'm doing it in the head of this sample front end. So the CSS styles that you add here, the variables that you define, should absolutely be included in a style sheet in your core application. So I'm going to define a ID selector class called widget-container. And I'm going to put my first property directly in here, and I just copied and pasted that from the reference. Now, if you don't have a widget container div, that's totally fine. In this case, you would define a class called Qrvey dashboard as an element selector class. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and save this, and we're going to go pop over to the browser and test it. So here we are in the browser, and I'm going to refresh this page. Notice that my fonts are not cursive, so you'll see a change once I refresh. All right, as expected, it did not update the fonts in my parent application. It did update all of the fonts for the widget, the dashboard builder widget. Notice that it did not change the fonts for the charts. As I mentioned, if you want to control styles for charts, you should build a theme within the dashboard builder to control that. So let's go back to Visual Studio and make a few more changes here. So back in Visual Studio Code, we're going to add a few more special CSS variables here. Just a couple more. The first one there will give the borders for all of my chart panels a more defined, rounded appearance. And then what I'm doing is I'm using special CSS variables for the AN module to change the font size and weight for the panel titles and the panel options for the charts. That's not quite the same as the chart itself because charts live within a panel. So if we wanted to change the fonts within the chart itself, as I've mentioned, you'd want to use a theme for that. But if you want to change the title and the icon color and font and size, that's actually part of the widget. So that's what we're going to do here. I've just made the panel titles larger. I've given them a bold font weight, and I've also made the panel options a bit bigger as well. Let's see what effect this has. So here we are back in the browser. I'm going to refresh. As you can see, my chart titles are a bit larger. It looks like my controls here have changed size as well. You'll notice that the borders are now distinctly more rounded than they were before. And now what I might want to do is just give these panels a bit more padding so that the controls and the chart title fonts are not so close to the border. So let's go make that change and then see what it looks like. Here we are back in Visual Studio Code. I'm going to add one more property from the reference here. This will control the padding, and I'm just going to give it about 15 pixels of padding. While we're here, I'm also going to increase the size of those panel options because they were just a bit too small. So let's save that and go back to the browser and check it out. All right, so I'm going to give this page one more refresh. All right, my panel controls are much larger now, and I've added some padding here so the chart titles are not bumping up right against the edges. So in this tutorial video, you learned how Qrvey CSS variables work in the context of styling your Qrvey widgets, and you saw an example of how we make some very simple style changes to the dashboard widget. So thanks so much for watching.